Okay, so today we're going to talk about relations. First, we're just going to review some basic vocabulary. You should know the graphing vocabulary, but we have your x-axis and your y-axis. And again, if you're going to have intervals on here that are different than 1, you need to label them like 2, 4, 6, 8, -2, -4, -6, and so on. You want to label them. And if they're a word problem, you certainly need to label them no matter what. And if it's a word problem, you also must have labels for like miles and hours, whichever the axes actually are labeled. And then of course you've got your origin and your ordered pair. So right here is a point, and it has an ordered pair. Let me finish this up. Oh, and I'm going to go by ones on there. So it's at 1, 2, 3, 4 on the y, which is the second part of the coordinate, and then -10 on the x. So remember the x coordinate is your horizontal movement, and your y coordinate is your vertical coordinate. Okay, so a relation is just a fancy way of saying a set of ordered pairs. The domain are the independent values, the x values. The range, they're the dependent values or the y values. So it kind of depends on what type of system you're in. If you're in a story problem, you're talking independent, dependent variables, which we'll review. If you're in just kind of a plain numbers section, you might be thinking x and y. So either one, depending on the situation. Mapping is just an illustration of how each element in the domain, or the x values, is paired with each element in the range, or the y values. So there are 4 basic ways to show a relation. We've got an ordered pair here, and maybe someone would ask you to give the domain. So you use a set bracket since it's a set of numbers, and you would put -1, 2, 0, because that's our domain here, our x values. And then the range, again, that's a set of numbers, so use your bracket. So that's 2, 4, and -3. Okay, and then the table, you know there's an XY table. So that's just putting your ordered pairs into your table. So -1, 2, 2, 4, 0, -3, graphing them. That means plotting those coordinates, making sure you make a neat graph with a solid representation with even intervals, so that it is more like a rule. These are rulers. Okay, so plot your points. -1, 2, 2, 4, -0, -3. And then a mapping, which is the one you're maybe less familiar with, you'll have your domain and your range and your domain, so you can list them. -1, 2, 0, and your range, and maybe put that in numerical order, so -3, 2, 4, and then you map them. So -1 goes with 2, so point to it. 2 goes with 4, point to it. 0 goes with -3, point to it. So it's kind of a picture of what it looks like. And we use the mapping a lot more when we get into functions coming up next, or the next lesson, so it helps us give a picture of everything. And also in the domain and range, forgot to mention this, you don't repeat numbers. So if there are 2 y values that are -3, you don't need to repeat them. So here's a review on independent and dependent variables. So an independent variable determines the output, and something that's independent means it's making all the decision making. So for example, time will happen no matter what we try to do. We can't avoid it. Time is always independent of anything else. An x value. Studying. That's an independent thing. Study time. That's time. See, that's chosen time instead of elapsing time. Now, a dependent variable is something where it's dependent on all that stuff up there. So whatever it is, miles per, how many miles you traveled over 2 days. So that could be one. So, and there's a lot of different things a dependent variable can be. You have to think about the situation. They're always the y values. And for example, study time, well, that's something you choose to do, that's independent. But your test score is often dependent on how much time you put into it. So you kind of have to read each situation and make a decision. So here are 2 examples. So we're going to identify the independent and dependent variables for each relation. The dance committee is selling tickets for the fall ball. The more tickets that they sell, the greater amount of money they can spend for decorations. So first you have to decide what your variables are. What are your numbers? So in this case, like amount of tickets and money. So which one's independent and which one's dependent? Well, the amount of money they make, or that they can spend, I should say money spent, on decorations. Because there's lots of types of money in this problem. And that can really depend. Okay, so the money spent on decorations depends on how many tickets they sell. So money spent on decorations is the dependent variable. And the amount of tickets is the independent variable. And that would help you if you were to make a graph, because you know that the amount of tickets would be on the x-axis and the amount of money spent on decorations would be the y. So now we're going to try B. So generally, the average price of going to the movies has steadily increased over time. This one's easy. Time. Time is independent. Especially elapsed time is independent. Time is the independent variable. And then the dependent variable is price. That's our other number. So it's a movie ticket price? So, or going to the movies. I don't know exactly what they mean by that. So going to movies, that is, price of. Shoot, I need the number. Goodness. Price of going to movies is the dependent variable. Okay, so just practicing identifying things, identifying the range, identifying the domain, identifying independent and dependent variables, so that we can use them. We'll apply them a little bit, and we'll use them a lot throughout the year. Okay, analyzing graphs. So we're talking about identifying the independent and dependent variables so that we can make proper graphs. And so now we need to analyze graphs before we can make them. So this graph represents the distance Francesca has ridden on her bike. Describe what happened in the graph. So you need to look at the independent and dependent variables and describe what happened in this graph. And you should see that this graph has like 3 basic parts. So we have this part. I'm going to highlight them 3 different colors so they're easier to see. Okay. So you have to describe what's going on in all 3 of those areas of the graph. So at first, what's happening? Well, we know she's riding a bike. So what's happening? Is she going up a hill? I mean, the line's going up. No, you have to pay attention to what's going on. Time is happening, and her distance is going up. So she's traveling. Okay? So she's biking. So she began, you can just kind of write a little story. She begins by traveling. And this would be a constant rate if you wanted to get real specific. But she begins by traveling, and then what happens? Something happens. Her time happens, but her distance does not. So that means she is standing somewhere, not doing anything. So, and then, I don't need an and quite yet. Then she stops, and who knows why? And then she continues traveling away. And then she continues travel. You don't have a lot of context because it's just the way it is. It's a graph. Okay, so now you are going to try these two down here. Describe what's happening in both of them. And then I'll come back and explain the answer. Okay, so I'm not going to write the entire answer down because you don't want to watch me write, but I will say it. So make sure you are listening and following along. And I'll kind of try to follow along with my pen here. This is driving to school. So what happens? Well, they start out going pretty fast because they go a fast distance to begin with. Then they stop, maybe at a red light. Then they travel again, but a little more slowly because they don't get as far. Then they stop again, and then they continue on. So paying attention to the sharpness of the line will help you get a better story. I know they traveled far here, which means they probably went faster than they did over here. So they drove, they stopped, they went slower this time, but they moved. They stopped and they went a little faster. Okay, changing income. So income is just how much money I'm making for whatever reason. So starts out making money. I'm making money. I get an increase in how much money I'm making, and then it stays steady for a while. And then I get a little bit of a decrease, or it stays the same. I'm always increasing how much money, and then all of a sudden I just stay the same for a few amounts of time, and then I increase how much money I'm making. So let me say that one more time. So you're making some money, then you get a sharp increase, and then you kind of slowly continue to increase how much money you're making, then you stop, you make the same amount of money for a while, and then you increase how much money you're making. Okay, so in your homework, you make sure and take care to analyze those graphs and actually tell a story.